My dad enjoyed Hitchcock immensely, but their working styles were different. I think my dad had said that for Hitchcock, actors were like chess pieces, and he expected them to do what they were told. And maybe my dad's way of working from the inside out and searching for the motivation of a character wasn't completely compatible with the way Hitchcock worked, which favored maybe the exterior to the interior. But they liked each other. And also, Hitchcock had seen the kind of box office that my dad brought to Spellbound, so he was very happy to have him in the film.
When my father came to Hollywood, he was always looking for mentors and people to work with. And so he established a relationship with Hitchcock, and they did 2 films together. Spellbound is probably the best known. And they became friends and mentors, and in fact, my father ended up buying Hitchcock's house. It was his first house, which is on top of Coldwater Canyon. That just reflects his habit of always making relationships and always looking for people that were at the top of the game. He wanted to be with the best directors, with the best producers, and he really worked at making those relationships. And I've been knowing a lot of people in business and industry for a long time, and people in charge of large institutions. My dad was on 7 days a week and building relationships and talking with people and going to events. And so his relationship with Hitchcock was one.
I don't think Hitchcock gave my dad acting guidance, but nonetheless, they had a good working relationship. And I think having already worked with him once, my dad understood what Hitchcock wanted and expected. But I don't believe that they talked a lot about the part and the backstory of the character. He wanted a certain look on their faces, and he would sometimes tell them to drain their face of expression. Those were the kind of directions he gave.
When my father was working on the Paradine case, did a lot of films in England in those early days, £1 Million Banknote, so forth. A lot of Hornblower was shot in England. He went back there throughout his career. A lot of Navarone was shot in England. So he liked that. I know, does it go far to say he wore English clothes for most of his life? He liked the style, and certainly that was the old Hollywood. There was a certain aspiration to be like a well-dressed Continental, and he adopted that style, and he was always known well-dressed, impeccably groomed. That was, again, the style.
I mean, I do remember hearing that Hitchcock wasn't particularly engaged with the Paradine case. It was the last of, I think, a 7-picture contract he had with Selznick, and he was fulfilling that final obligation, and I don't think he was completely 100% present and focused on the film.
I know Selznick was very strong. He had the final cut, and he exercised it.
I know Hitch wanted the film to have a very gritty, real look, and Selznick wanted it to have more of a glamorous, glossy look.
I'm not in the business, but I would not exercise a final cut over Alfred Hitchcock if you paid me $1 million. But Selznick felt he had to make it his way.
Selznick was rewriting during the shooting, which meant that sometimes they wouldn't start shooting till noon. They were behind schedule after 3 days already, so there were production problems, and whenever that happens, it creates tension on the set. But nonetheless, there's, again, such interesting elements, about whether she did commit the murder. You don't know whether she did, but by the time you're starting to realize that she did, my dad's character, Keen, is becoming more convinced that she didn't. So that creates a fascinating kind of tension, and I think she was so inscrutable and mysterious, it made it very interesting. Alida Valli, her performance, and I think, the relationship between the Keens was wonderful, and you felt like this great marriage was being threatened by the presence of the stranger. And how often does that happen, that a marriage, a good, strong marriage can fall on the rocks because somebody at work comes in and disrupts it? My dad felt that there weren't enough scenes in the script to explain his infatuation with Mrs. Paradine.
Come along, Keen.
Again, I think that's more a reflection of the way they made movies at the time, is that they just shot everything, and they shot it from 10 angles, and they shot off scenes, and they followed. The director would get an idea, and they would go into a drawing room and they have a conversation about a piece of action that had taken place. Maybe they would use it, maybe they would not. In those days, carrying a film, it wasn't cheap, but it wasn't as expensive as it was today. And directors were allowed to just, if they had a whim and it took 2 days to shoot it, they would go ahead and shoot it.
My dad didn't speak about the Paradine case a lot, so it's more what I've heard over the years and what I remember, but it wasn't something that he dwelled on. I mean, he felt so lucky to work with Hitchcock.
By that time, his career had changed a little bit, and he was a little more in control of the films he took. And so he was perhaps a little more actively involved, really more coming into his own character and his own acting persona.
There was one story he told about working with Louis Jourdan. This was Louis Jourdan's first American film, and he came on so strong. You know, he was so smoldering, so handsome. And my dad, in these long takes, because Hitch was pioneering this 4-camera setup on the Paradine case so that he wouldn't have to cut and move the camera for the close-ups. He had 4 cameras placed in the courtroom, and he let scenes play out in long 10-minute takes so they could capture, you know, both actors and close-ups and long shots at the same time. So my dad really enjoyed that because it was like returning to his theater days. But he told me that in his courtroom scene with Louis Jourdan, he realized that Louis would look into his eyes sometimes for 10 minutes without blinking once. So my dad thought, well, I don't want to blink either. He told me that he kept his eyes open for so long that he actually got conjunctivitis trying to keep up with Louis Jourdan. But they became great friends. Their friendship endured their whole lives, and Louis was part of a famous poker game that my dad had going with Frank Sinatra and Jack Lemmon and Louis and the writer Larry Gelbart and a bunch of their friends.
Many things have become obscured in this trial. Many things have become obscured.
I think he was good at showing a man of conscience thinking, and the conflict between his career and his passion for this woman. And there are many scenes not with dialogue, but just him thinking, and he could reflect that very, very well. And he could explain through his acting that conflict, the man of conscience. And that was really him all the way through his career, the man of conscience. There was the occasional Luke McCandless, you know, there was a Mengele, okay, so there are a couple of bad guys, which he liked exactly because they were opposite to character. But his showing that conflict of conscience, I think that's a consistent throughout his career, and that certainly came out there.